You won't believe what Lisa Weiss just exposed. After years of silence, she's dropping shocking secrets that could end Doug Weiss and Johnny Lamb's public image forever. Betrayals, hidden scandals, and lies finally come to light, tearing apart everything they built. If you thought you knew the truth, think again. This bombshell changes everything for Doug and Joni, and you won't want to miss what Lisa just revealed. For years, Lisa Weiss stayed silent. She watched from the sidelines while Doug Weiss built his platform as a respected Christian marriage counselor, speaking on stages, writing books, and appearing on TV, telling couples how to save their marriages. To the world, Doug was the man with all the answers, the expert on loyalty, faithfulness, and covenant love. People admired him, trusted him, and saw him as the example of what a godly husband should be. But behind closed doors, Lisa was living a reality that didn't match the image Doug presented to the world. Lisa supported Doug for over 3 decades, believing in the mission they were building together. She raised their children, managed their home, and stood by his side while he traveled to speak about marriage, even when it meant being alone most of the time. She believed in him, trusted him, and tried to keep their marriage strong, even as she started to feel invisible in her own home. Doug was always busy, always on mission, but Lisa's needs and their connection as husband and wife began to fade into the background of his growing public life. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness, though it hurt deeply. It was watching the man she loved stand on stages, telling others how to love their wives, how to fight for their marriages, while he barely looked her in the eyes when he came home. She felt like a ghost, the woman in the background of Doug's story, present but unseen, giving up pieces of herself so he could stand in the spotlight. She wondered if anyone would believe her if she told them what was happening behind the scenes. Doug was so convincing, so charming, so respected. For years, Lisa tried to protect their family's image. She prayed, hoped, and convinced herself that things would get better. She believed that if she could just be more patient, more supportive, more understanding, Doug would remember the dreams they shared when they were young. But the distance between them only grew. Lisa felt herself breaking down, losing the parts of her that once felt alive. She was not just losing her husband, she was losing herself in the process of trying to hold everything together. In 2024, Lisa found the courage to speak up. She stepped forward, sharing her story, her pain, and the truth of what her life had been like. It was not a story of bitterness, but of clarity. She spoke calmly, but her words were powerful, shaking the carefully crafted image Doug had built. Lisa shared how she had lived in the shadows, how she had tried to save a marriage that Doug wasn't fighting for, and how painful it was to watch him teach others about faithfulness while ignoring his own vows at home.
He's destroying me. And I said, no, Joni, something very bad has happened. And there's been an essay and all of this. Oh, no. And then she defended Pete. He's hurt Pete so much. The Pete that Rebecca and JW wrote a huge letter about. That Pete? The Pete that Rebecca and JW won't let into their home? That Pete? Is a good guy. She said that Susie was a pathological liar and that she had made these accusations against a very nice man, the chiropractor, who is deceased now, but has a record and attacked her. So I was in shock what Joni was saying to me. I implored her. I said, please reconcile with Jonathan for yourself. That would be the hope. I saw that side of her. I can only say it's nothing like the Joni on television. It's nothing like that sweet person. But I did see that person somewhat in the video where she was talking about Jonathan has been conducting a smear campaign. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I hadn't seen Jonathan conducting a smear campaign. I'd seen Jonathan in...
She wasn't seeking revenge. She was seeking freedom, truth, and healing. For Lisa, breaking her silence was about reclaiming her voice after years of being silent and unseen. She wanted others to know that even when someone looks perfect on stage, the truth at home can be very different. And in telling her story, Lisa began to find herself again, reminding women everywhere that they deserve to be seen, valued, and loved, not just in words spoken to a crowd, but in the quiet moments at home where love is meant to be real. From the outside, Lisa and Doug Weiss seemed like the perfect couple. They had the smiles, the family photos, the church events, and the carefully curated social media moments that made everything look easy and blessed. People looked up to them, admiring their marriage and seeing them as an example of what a godly partnership should be. But behind the doors of their home, away from the cameras and conference stages, things were quietly falling apart. It didn't happen with one big fight or a single moment of betrayal. It was the slow, painful drift that happens when someone you love becomes more and more distant, and you're left reaching for a hand that no longer reaches back. At first, Lisa tried to ignore it. Doug had always been busy, building his counseling practice, speaking at churches and appearing on TV to talk about marriage and faithfulness. She told herself it was just a busy season, that once things settled, he would come back to her and they would reconnect. But the busy seasons never ended. Doug's phone was always buzzing, his mind always somewhere else, planning the next sermon or the next book. Lisa would wait for him to come home, hoping for a moment of connection, a real conversation, or even just a look in the eyes that said, "I see you." Instead, he came home tired, distracted, and still locked into the world outside their home. She would cook dinner, sit across from him, and feel like she was alone at the table. At church, Doug would preach about the importance of pursuing your spouse, making them feel loved and valued. But Lisa felt like the words were meant for everyone else except her. She would watch him talk about cherishing your wife while she felt like an afterthought in the life they built together. It was like living in two worlds: the public world, where they were a strong, united couple, and the private world, where she was slowly fading into the background. She tried to speak up, to tell him how lonely she felt. But Doug would nod and say he understood, then move on to the next call, the next meeting, the next travel plan. She would cry quietly, telling herself that she needed to be strong, that this was just part of the calling, that supporting Doug's ministry meant sacrificing her own needs for the greater good. She wanted to believe they were still a team, that they were still in this together. But with every passing day, she felt the gap between them grow. Doug wasn't unkind. He wasn't shouting or angry. That might have been easier to confront. Instead, he was absent while being physically present, wrapped up in his own world while Lisa felt herself becoming invisible. They would go to events together and people would praise Doug, telling Lisa how lucky she was to be married to such a godly man. She would smile and nod, holding back tears, wondering if anyone would ever see the truth she was carrying alone. The hardest part was the confusion. Doug wasn't a villain. He was a man who genuinely believed in helping others, who gave everything to his work. But somewhere along the way, he forgot about the woman who had stood beside him through it all. Lisa found herself questioning her worth, wondering if she was asking for too much by simply wanting to be seen and loved by her husband. She would think back to when they first met, how they had dreams of building a life together, raising a family, and serving God as a team. They would stay up late talking about the future, laughing about their plans, and promising to always put each other first. She held on to those memories during the long nights when Doug was away, or when he was home but emotionally miles apart. She would look at the man sleeping next to her and wonder when he had stopped seeing her, when he had stopped choosing her. The days turned into years, and Lisa felt herself becoming a shadow in her own life. She would take care of the kids, run the home, and support Doug's growing ministry while feeling like she was disappearing. She tried to fill the emptiness with church activities, friendships, and caring for her children, but the ache of being unseen by the one person who mattered most never went away. Sometimes Lisa would try to reignite the spark. She would plan date nights, write him notes, and try to talk about their dreams again. Doug would agree, but his mind was always elsewhere. He would take calls during dinner, check emails during their rare evenings together, and talk about work even when she tried to discuss their relationship. Lisa began to realize that she was competing with Doug's mission, and it was a battle she was losing. The emotional neglect turned into deep loneliness, the kind that makes you question your sanity. Lisa wondered if she was expecting too much, if she was being selfish, or if this was just what marriage looked like after decades together. But deep down, she knew that love wasn't supposed to feel like being alone in a crowded room. It wasn't supposed to feel like she was constantly begging for scraps of attention from the man she loved. She prayed, hoping God would fix what was broken, hoping Doug would see her again, hoping for a miracle that would bring them back to the love they once shared. But the miracle never came. Instead, the gap widened until it became clear that their marriage was collapsing under the weight of Doug's ambition and Lisa's unspoken pain. The worst part was that no one else knew. To everyone else, they were still the perfect couple, the marriage experts, the ones who had it all together. Lisa would smile in photos and sit quietly at Doug's events, clapping when others clapped, all while her heart was breaking. She lived in silence, too afraid to ruin Doug's image, too scared to speak the truth, and too tired to keep pretending everything was fine. Behind closed doors, the collapse was slow but steady. It was the missed conversations, the lack of affection, the emotional absence that screamed louder than any fight ever could. It was the look in Doug's eyes that said he was somewhere else, even when he was right in front of her. It was the slow realization that Lisa had lost herself trying to support a man who had stopped seeing her long ago. By the time the divorce came, the marriage had been over for years, even if Lisa hadn't wanted to admit it. She had fought for them, prayed for them, and believed in them, but she couldn't save a marriage alone. The collapse of their marriage wasn't about one big moment. It was about thousands of small moments that chipped away at the love they once had, leaving Lisa alone in a life that looked perfect from the outside, but was empty on the inside. And in the quiet aftermath, Lisa was left to pick up the pieces, to rediscover who she was without Doug, and to find her voice again after years of being silent in a marriage that was already gone long before it officially ended. When Lisa Weiss first heard that Doug had remarried, it felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. It wasn't just that he had moved on, it was how quickly it all happened. Just months after their divorce papers were signed, Doug, the man she had stood beside for over 30 years, was standing next to Joni Lamb, saying vows to another woman as if everything they'd built together had been a chapter he could simply close and walk away from. To the world, Doug's remarriage to Joni Lamb was a shocking but polished headline. Joni, a well-known Christian television host, and Doug, the marriage counselor who spent his life teaching others about faithfulness and commitment, were now a power couple in Christian circles. Their wedding photos showed smiling faces, a joyful ceremony, and social media captions about God's timing and new beginnings. But for Lisa, those photos were like knives, cutting through her as she sat alone, trying to process how her world had fallen apart so quickly. Lisa had spent decades supporting Doug's calling, raising their family while he traveled, speaking about the sanctity of marriage, preaching about the importance of fighting for your spouse, and encouraging couples to never give up on each other. She believed those words, lived those words, and shaped her entire life around them. So when Doug moved on so fast, it wasn't just the betrayal of losing him, it felt like the betrayal of everything he had preached, everything they had worked to represent, and everything she had sacrificed to support. What made it even more painful was who he remarried. Lisa had known of Joni for years. Joni and Doug had moved in the same Christian circles, appearing at events, sharing ministry spaces, and crossing paths in the world of Christian media. Lisa had never imagined that the woman who was once just another face at conferences would become the woman to take her place, to share the life Lisa thought she would have until the end. Rumors started swirling, as they always do, about whether Doug and Joni had been emotionally connected before the divorce was finalized. Lisa didn't want to believe it, but the timeline was too fast, too clean to feel right. Questions she couldn't answer kept her up at night. Had they been talking while Lisa was still fighting to save her marriage? Had the seeds of this new relationship started while Lisa was praying for God to heal what was breaking in her home? It wasn't just the remarriage, it was how public it was. The wedding was celebrated by people in their community, praised as a God story, while Lisa was still picking up the shattered pieces of her identity and trying to find the strength to face each day. Friends who had once prayed with her and Doug were now congratulating him and Joni, posting their blessings online, acting like Lisa had never existed. She felt invisible, erased, as if her decades of loyalty and love had simply vanished from everyone's memory. Lisa remembered sitting in her living room, scrolling through photos of Doug and Joni smiling together, surrounded by people who were happy for them, while she was alone, trying to explain to her children why everything they knew was changing so fast. She watched as Doug and Joni went on television, sharing their story, presenting it as a beautiful testimony of God's timing, while her story, her pain, was left untold and ignored. What hurt Lisa the most was the hypocrisy. Doug had spent years counseling couples, telling them to fight for their marriages, to be patient, to honor their vows, and to put in the work even when it was hard. Yet when it came to their own marriage, he had walked away, moving on to someone else in record time, leaving Lisa to deal with the emotional fallout while he stepped into a new life without looking back. Lisa's pain wasn't just about losing Doug. It was about losing the future she believed they were building together. It was about watching the man she loved turn into someone she didn't recognize, someone who could publicly celebrate a new love while she was left grieving the loss of a life they had promised to each other. It was about feeling discarded, replaced, and silenced in a story that had once included her. She found herself replaying memories of the years they spent together, the dreams they shared, the promises they made, and the prayers they prayed together for their family. She wondered if any of it had been real for him, or if it had all been a stepping stone to a different life he had been waiting to live. The questions were endless, and the answers never came. The remarriage wasn't just a headline for Lisa. It was a daily reminder that her life had changed forever. She had to watch as Doug and Joni continued to build a platform together, gaining attention and praise for their new union, while she was left to heal privately, away from the cameras and the congratulations. It was as if the life she had lived, the sacrifices she had made, and the love she had given were nothing but a footnote in Doug's story. But in the quiet moments, when the tears would fall, Lisa began to realize something powerful. Doug's choices didn't define her worth. The speed of his remarriage didn't erase the decades she had given, nor did it diminish the love she had offered or the faithfulness she had shown. Doug and Joni could move on and present their narrative, but Lisa still had a story worth telling, a story of resilience, faith, and the strength it takes to stand back up when the world feels like it has forgotten you. Lisa began to understand that while Doug and Joni's remarriage shocked the world, it also freed her. It freed her from the illusion she had been holding on to, allowing her to see that her healing and her future were now in her hands. She could grieve what she had lost while stepping into a new season, one where her voice mattered, where she was seen, and where she no longer had to live in the shadows of someone else's story. In the end, the shocking remarriage to Joni Lamb was not the end of Lisa's story. It was the painful turning point that pushed her to find herself again, to reclaim her identity, and to begin living a life where she no longer had to disappear so someone else could shine. It was the moment that showed her that even in betrayal, there is the possibility of becoming whole again, and that even in the darkest seasons, there is hope for a new beginning. When Doug and Joni's marriage became public, Lisa felt like her entire life was on display for people to pick apart. It was everywhere. Social media posts praising the new beginning, church leaders sharing congratulations, and Christian media platforms posting stories celebrating their union as a God story. Strangers online called it a testimony, not knowing the heartbreak and confusion that Lisa was living through alone behind closed doors. For Lisa, it wasn't just about losing her husband. It was about losing her place in a life she had spent decades building. She had been Doug's partner in ministry, the quiet supporter who helped him build his platform, raise their children, and keep their home together while he traveled and spoke about faithfulness and marriage. Now she was watching as Doug and Joni shared smiles on TV screens, while her own world felt like it was collapsing in slow motion. The public nature of their remarriage made it harder for Lisa to grieve privately. Everywhere she turned, there were reminders of how quickly Doug had moved on, and with someone who was already known in their circles. It felt like Lisa's pain was invisible to the world, as if she had been erased from the story, replaced with a narrative that made Doug and Joni's marriage look like a perfect blessing from God. But for Lisa, it felt like a betrayal that was being celebrated publicly, while she was left to clean up the emotional wreckage in silence. People who had once prayed with her and Doug now congratulated him on social media. Friends she thought would stand with her during the hardest season of her life chose to stay quiet, afraid of taking sides. Church members whispered, trying to piece together what really happened, while Lisa tried to find the strength to get out of bed and face each day. It felt like the entire world had moved on without her, leaving her to process a grief that was too heavy to carry alone. Lisa would scroll through her phone late at night, reading posts and comments, trying to understand how the man who had preached about fighting for marriage could start a new one so quickly. It made her question everything she believed about love, faith, and commitment. She felt small, unseen, and deeply alone, as if her entire identity had been tied to being Doug's wife. And now, without him, she didn't know who she was anymore. The hardest moments came when Lisa had to explain to their children why everything had changed so fast. They were old enough to see what was happening, old enough to read the headlines and the social media posts, and old enough to feel the confusion of watching their father move on so quickly. Lisa tried to protect them from the pain, but she saw it in their eyes and heard it in their questions. Why did Dad leave? Why is he with someone else already? It broke Lisa's heart to see her children hurting, feeling abandoned, and trying to make sense of a world that suddenly felt so unstable. For a while, Lisa didn't know how to move forward. She felt stuck, frozen in a moment she couldn't change, haunted by the memories of a life that was gone. She missed the man she once loved, the dreams they had shared, and the family moments that had once felt so secure. There were days when getting out of bed felt impossible, when the weight of betrayal and public shame was too much to carry. But slowly, in the quiet moments, Lisa began to find herself again. It started with small steps, taking walks, journaling, praying not just for healing, but for strength to keep going. She realized that Doug's choices didn't define her worth, and that his public narrative didn't erase the truth of what she had lived and given. She started to understand that while she couldn't change what happened, she could choose how she would live moving forward.